They told me to forget what I saw in Sector 7. They took my evidence, made me sign documents that could send me to federal prison if I talked, and reassigned me to a desk job processing campground permits. But 3 days ago I found another one. And this time I'm not staying quiet. What I'm about to tell you happened last October in the Appalachian Mountains, deep in a section of national forest so remote that most people don't even know it exists. I violated every regulation, every oath I took, and possibly several federal laws by writing this. But after 12 years as a forest ranger, after everything I've seen and everything they've hidden, someone needs to know the truth. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of stories that will make you question whether you're truly alone right now. You're listening to Silent Scream Chronicles. Do well to subscribe, share, and hit the like button for more tales to come. And also let me know where you're listening from in the comments. I've been patrolling these mountains for over a decade now. The Appalachians are old, some of the oldest mountains on Earth, worn down by time into rolling peaks covered in dense hardwood forest. They're beautiful in a way that gets into your bones. Layers of blue ridges stretching to the horizon, morning fog pooling in the valleys, the smell of rhododendron and mountain laurel after rain. I've pulled lost hikers out of gorges, tracked black bears away from campgrounds, and spent countless nights under these ancient trees. The section I patrol covers roughly 40,000 acres in the Western District. It's divided into numbered sectors for administrative purposes. Sectors 1 through 6 contain the maintained trails, the campgrounds, the areas where tourists and day hikers venture. We patrol those weekly during season, sometimes daily if the weather's good and the crowds are heavy. Then there's Sector 7. Sector 7 sits in the northwest corner of my district. 18,000 acres of old-growth forest that nobody visits. No trails, no facilities, nothing but steep mountainsides, narrow hollows, and terrain hostile enough to keep even experienced backpackers away. The mountains there are particularly rugged, all rock faces and dense laurel thickets that can take you an hour to push through 100 yards. We're required to patrol it twice a year, spring and fall, mostly just to check for illegal activity or environmental damage. In my 12 years, I'd done that patrol 23 times. It was always routine, always boring. Until October 15th of last year. The morning started normally. I loaded my pack the night before with everything I needed for a 2-day patrol. First aid kit, emergency beacon, water filtration system, freeze-dried meals, spare batteries, my standard issue radio, and topographic maps of Sector 7. I've done this so many times I could pack in my sleep. My wife made me breakfast before dawn, kissed me goodbye, and reminded me to check in when I got back to cell range. Normal. Routine. I started the hike at first light from the service road that dead ends at the western boundary. The trailhead, if you could call it that, was just a gap in the trees marked with a faded yellow blaze. Beyond that marker there was nothing but wilderness. I shouldered my pack, checked my compass, and headed into the forest. The first few hours were exactly what I expected. Dense canopy overhead filtering the morning light into a green twilight. The forest floor was thick with leaf litter from countless autumns, soft and silent under my boots. I could hear woodpeckers drumming on dead trees, the distant call of ravens, the rustle of squirrels in the branches. The air smelled like earth and decay and growing things, that particular scent of Appalachian forest that I've never encountered anywhere else. I followed an old logging road for the first mile, an overgrown track from the 1940s that's barely visible now. Then I cut north, using my GPS and compass to navigate toward the first checkpoint. The terrain got steeper, the forest denser. I had to pick my way through thickets of mountain laurel, their twisted branches forming natural tunnels. My pants were soaked with dew within the first hour. By mid-morning, I'd reached the ridge that forms the northern boundary of Sector 7. I stopped there to rest and document my findings. A few downed trees that would need clearing, some deer damage to young hemlocks, normal environmental observations. I marked the coordinates, took photos, updated my log. Everything was routine. The view from that ridge was spectacular. I could see the folded ridgelines stretching away in every direction, layers of blue mountains fading into the distance. The valleys were already filling with that characteristic Appalachian haze, the organic compounds released by the trees creating a blue mist that gave these mountains their name. I ate my lunch sitting on a flat rock, watching a hawk circle in the thermals below me. That's when I noticed the silence. It crept up on me gradually, so I didn't register it at first. But as I sat there, I realized I couldn't hear anything. No birds, no insects, no wind in the trees. Just an absolute pressing silence that seemed to absorb sound rather than simply represent its absence. I've spent enough time in these mountains to know that forests are never truly quiet. There's always something. Leaves rustling, branches creaking, the distant sound of water, the calls of birds and animals. But this was different. This was a silence so complete it felt physical, like a weight pressing on my eardrums. I stood up and looked around. The trees were completely still. Not a tremor of movement in any branch or leaf, despite it being a breezy October day. The air felt heavy, oppressive, like the pressure change before a thunderstorm. But the sky above the canopy was clear blue, not a cloud visible through the gaps in the leaves. I checked my radio. Static. Not unusual this deep in the mountains, but the timing made me uneasy. I tried my cell phone even though I knew there was no signal out here. Nothing. Every instinct developed over 12 years in these mountains told me something was wrong. I should have turned back right then. Should have marked my position and gotten out of Sector 7. Instead, I told myself I was being paranoid and kept moving north toward the second checkpoint. The silence followed me like a shadow. For the next 3 hours, I hiked through that dead, oppressive quiet. Every sound I made seemed obscenely loud. My boots on the leaf litter, my breathing, the creak of my pack straps, the rustle of my rain jacket against my shirt. But there was nothing else. No animals. No insects. No birds. The forest felt empty, abandoned, like every living thing had fled from something. I started paying closer attention to my surroundings, looking for some explanation. Forest fire. No smoke, no smell of burning, and the vegetation looked healthy. Disease outbreak. The trees showed no obvious signs of stress. Chemical contamination. No unusual odors. And the leaves were still green despite it being mid-October. By early afternoon, I was seriously considering abandoning the patrol. But I was already more than halfway through Sector 7, and turning back meant either camping overnight in this oppressive silence or doing a forced march back to my truck in the dark. Neither option appealed to me. So I kept going, telling myself I'd finish the patrol and file a detailed report about the unusual conditions. That's when I came over a rise and saw the clearing below me. Stopped me in my tracks. In 12 years of patrolling these mountains, I'd never seen anything like it. The clearing was roughly circular, maybe 50 feet in diameter, and every plant inside it was dead. Not dying, not stressed, but completely dead. The grass was brown and brittle. The shrubs were skeletal, their branches bare of leaves. Even the trees at the perimeter looked sick, their leaves yellowed and dropping prematurely. But the circle itself was the most disturbing part. It was too perfect, too geometric, like someone had used a compass to draw it. I've seen plenty of natural die-offs in my career. Fungal infections, root diseases, soil contamination. They're always irregular, following the pattern of water flow or root systems or whatever vector is causing them. This was different. This was a perfect circle carved into the forest like someone had used a cookie cutter on the landscape. I approached carefully, my hand instinctively moving to the bear spray on my belt even though I knew this had nothing to do with bears. I took photos from multiple angles, noting the sharp demarcation between healthy vegetation and dead. The boundary was so precise I could see exactly where it shifted, like crossing an invisible line. When I stepped into the clearing, the ground felt wrong under my boots. Soft, spongy, like walking on foam. I knelt down and examined the soil. It was completely dry, crumbling to powder when I squeezed it, despite the fact that we'd had rain 3 days earlier and the soil outside the circle was still damp. I took soil samples, sealing them in plastic bags and labeling them with coordinates and time. I documented the dead vegetation, noting species and the extent of decay. I measured the diameter of the circle with my rangefinder, 47 feet, almost perfectly round. I spent 20 minutes being methodical, being professional, trying to ignore the way my hands were shaking. Because this wasn't natural. Everything about it screamed wrongness. The precision, the completeness of the die-off, the bone-dry soil, the way it sat in the landscape like a wound. I was about to leave when I noticed the path. It wasn't a trail in any conventional sense. More like a line where the vegetation was compressed, bent down, as if something large and heavy had passed through. The path was maybe 4 feet wide, and it led away from the clearing, heading deeper into Sector 7 toward an area of particularly rugged terrain that I'd never explored. The maps showed it as steep hollows and narrow valleys, the kind of terrain that takes hours to cover even short distances. Everything in my body told me to turn back. To get out of this silent forest, away from this impossible clearing, back to my truck and civilization. But I'm a ranger. It's my job to investigate unusual activity. And whatever had created that perfect circle of death, whatever had left that path of compressed vegetation, I needed to document it. So I followed it down into the hollow. The descent was steep, the path winding between massive oaks and tulip poplars, some of them centuries old. I had to use saplings to steady myself, my boots slipping on loose rocks and damp leaves. The silence pressed in closer as I went down, if that was possible. I found myself holding my breath, straining to hear anything, any sound that would break this oppressive quiet. At the bottom of the hollow I found the second clearing. This one was larger, maybe 100 feet across, and it wasn't circular. The shape was more rectangular with rounded corners, oriented roughly north-south. The same dead vegetation, the same powder-dry soil. But there was something else here, something that made my blood run cold and my professional detachment evaporate completely. Patterns. Carved into the dead earth were lines and symbols, geometric shapes that covered the entire clearing in an intricate network. Some were shallow, barely visible depressions. Others were deep gouges, like something had torn through the soil with tremendous force. The patterns overlapped and intersected, creating a dense web of marks that seemed to have structure, organization, purpose. I stood at the edge of that clearing for a long time, trying to process what I was seeing. My first rational thought was that someone had done this. Some kind of elaborate art installation or land art project. But that didn't make sense. This clearing was miles from any road or maintained trail, in terrain so difficult that getting equipment in would be nearly impossible. And the patterns themselves, they weren't random. They had a logic to them, a coherence that I couldn't understand but could somehow feel. I walked the perimeter, taking dozens of photos, shooting video, narrating what I was seeing into my phone's voice recorder. I took more soil samples. I measured the dimensions. I documented everything I could think of, falling back on procedure because the alternative was to acknowledge how terrified I was. The sun was getting low, filtering through the trees at that golden angle that means maybe 2 hours of daylight left. The smart thing, the rational thing would have been to turn back. To get out of this hollow and find a safe place to camp for the night. But the patterns in the soil, all those intersecting lines and symbols, they seemed to point toward something. They converged on the eastern edge of the clearing, all the lines flowing toward a specific point. And beyond that point, through the trees, I could see something. Shape. A structure that didn't belong in these ancient mountains. I've replayed this moment in my mind thousands of times since then. The moment I decided to keep going instead of turning back. I tell myself I was following protocol, investigating an anomaly, doing my job. But the truth is something else. The truth is I was drawn to it, pulled forward by something I still don't understand. I crossed the clearing, my boots crunching on the dead grass, and pushed through the line of sick, dying trees on the far side. And that's when I saw it clearly. The structure rose maybe 30 feet high, partially hidden by the surrounding forest. It was made of metal, but not any metal I recognized. The surface was smooth, seamless, with an iridescent quality that shifted colors as I moved. Blues and greens and purples that shouldn't have been possible. The shape was hard to describe because it seemed to change depending on the angle I viewed it from. Sometimes it looked like a narrow tower, sometimes like a dome, Sometimes like something else entirely, something my brain couldn't quite process or hold on to. There were no seams, no joints, no visible means of construction. It didn't look built so much as grown, like it had somehow emerged from the earth itself. And despite what had to be years or decades of exposure to the elements, it showed minimal weathering. A little moss at the base, some vines beginning to wrap around what might have been supports or protrusions, but otherwise pristine. From up there I could see down into the hollow. The structure was still visible, a dark shape among the trees. But it was dormant now, or at least appeared to be. No light, no sound. Just an impossible thing sitting in the middle of the Appalachian wilderness like it had every right to be there. I checked my GPS. I was still miles from my truck, and the sun was setting. I should have made camp, should have followed protocol for overnight stays. Instead, I hiked through the night, using my headlamp to navigate, pushing through exhaustion and fear. I kept expecting to hear that sound again, to see that light. But the forest was normal now, or as normal as these mountains ever are. I could hear owls calling, the rustle of nocturnal animals, the wind in the trees. I reached my truck at 2 a.m, threw my gear in the back, and drove straight to the ranger station. I found my supervisor, Frank, asleep in the back room. He's been doing this job for 30 years. Has seen everything these mountains can throw at a person. I woke him up and told him everything. He listened without interrupting, his expression getting more serious as I talked. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked me if I'd been drinking, if I was on any medications, if I'd hit my head during the patrol. I showed him the photos on my camera. The clearing, the patterns, the structure. Clear, undeniable documentation. He made a phone call, then another. Then several more. By dawn I had people in suits asking me questions. Not Forest Service. Not Department of the Interior. Other agencies. Federal agencies with acronyms I didn't recognize. Staffed by people who didn't give their full names and showed me identification so briefly I couldn't read it. They took everything. My camera, my phone, my samples, my notes, my maps with the coordinates marked. They made me sign documents. Page after page of legal language about national security and criminal penalties for unauthorized disclosure. They told me Sector 7 was being temporarily closed for environmental assessment. They told me not to discuss what I'd seen with anyone, including my wife, including other rangers, including Frank. Then they told me to forget about it. As if that were possible. I tried to go back 2 weeks later. I took a different route, approached from the eastern boundary, planning to hike in from a direction they wouldn't expect. I got within a mile of that hollow before I hit the perimeter. Chain link fencing, posted signs, motion sensors, armed security in what looked like private contractor uniforms. They'd sealed off a 5-square-mile section of Sector 7, called it a contaminated site, threatened prosecution for trespassing. They'd done it in 2 weeks. 2 weeks to fence off 5 square miles of rugged mountain terrain. That's not normal. That's not how government operations work. That's not possible unless someone considered it urgent enough to throw unlimited resources at. I stood at that fence for an hour, staring into the forest I'd patrolled for 12 years, wondering what was happening in there, what they'd found, what they were doing with it, whether anyone outside those agencies would ever know the truth. I was transferred to a desk job shortly after, processing permits, managing campground reservations, coordinating volunteer programs. Important work, necessary work, but not why I became a ranger. They didn't fire me, didn't punish me officially, just moved me somewhere I couldn't cause problems. For the past year I've tried to accept it, tried to move on, tried to convince myself that maybe I'd misunderstood what I saw, that there was a rational explanation I just wasn't qualified to understand. Then 3 days ago I was doing a routine site inspection in Sector 4. Completely different part of the forest, miles from Sector 7. And I found another clearing. Same size, same perfect circle. Same dead vegetation and powder-dry soil. Same patterns carved into the earth. And in the center boot prints. Multiple sets. Recent, maybe within the last 48 hours. They're not containing it. Whatever is in Sector 7, whatever I found in that hollow, it's spreading. Or maybe there are multiple structures, scattered through these ancient mountains, and I just happened to find one that was active. I went home that night and dug out the backup files. Before they took my camera, I'd uploaded everything to a cloud storage account. They never asked about backups, never thought a rural forest ranger would have that kind of operational security. But I do, because I've seen how quickly evidence can disappear, how easily the truth can be buried. I have hundreds of photos, hours of video, soil analysis results from before they confiscated my samples, GPS coordinates down to the exact meter. All of it stored, encrypted, with instructions to release everything if anything happens to me. I don't know what those structures are. I don't know who built them or how long they've been hidden in these mountains. I don't know what that crystal object was or why it responded to my presence. And I don't know what the federal agencies are doing with the information I gave them. But I know the official story is a lie. I know they're hiding something in Sector 7. And I know it's spreading. The Appalachians are old. Old enough that they were here before the Atlantic Ocean existed, before dinosaurs walked the earth, before life crawled out of the primordial seas. They've been worn down by time from peaks that once rivaled the Himalayas to these gentle, rolling mountains. They've seen the rise and fall of countless ecosystems, countless species, eons of geological time. What else have they seen? What else do they hide beneath their ancient forests? I've been a forest ranger for 12 years. I thought I knew these mountains. I thought I understood what was out there. I was wrong. And the people who are supposed to protect our public lands, who are supposed to be transparent with the public they serve, they're lying about what they've found. Someone needs to know the truth. Someone needs to demand answers. Because if there's one structure in Sector 7, and possibly another in Sector 4, how many more are there? How long have they been there? And what happens when they all activate at once? I'm writing this because I can't stay silent anymore. Because the official channels have failed. Because the truth matters, even when it's frightening, even when it challenges everything we think we know. If you hike in the Appalachians, pay attention to your surroundings. If you find a clearing that's too perfect, too geometric, document it and leave immediately. If you notice absolute silence where there should be sound, trust your instincts and get out. If you see structures that don't belong, that seem to exist outside the normal logic of the world, do not approach them. Do not touch them. Just mark the location and report it to multiple agencies, multiple people, because a single report can disappear. And if you're one of the people who took my evidence, who sealed off Sector 7, who threatened me into silence, know this. I kept copies of everything. You can't make this disappear. You can't intimidate me anymore. The truth about what's in our mountains deserves to see daylight. I'm done protecting your secrets. I'm done pretending everything is normal. The truth is in Sector 7. Hidden behind your fences and your armed guards and your bureaucratic lies. And people deserve to know what's really out there. If this account resonates with you, if you believe the public has a right to know what's being hidden in our national forests, share this story. Subscribe to this channel for updates as I continue to investigate. I'll be posting more evidence, more documentation, everything they didn't want you to see. The Appalachian Mountains hold secrets older than human civilization. It's time we started asking what those secrets are and who's working so hard to keep them buried. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and help me demand transparency about what's really happening in Sector 7. Together, we can force answers about what's hidden in our public lands.